She doesn't belong in this kitchen. Get her out of my sight. Those were the first words Marguerite de Champvaillant said about Abba Boateng on the morning of her son's engagement party. She didn't lower her voice. She didn't look away. She said it the way some people say the weather is turning, like it was simply a fact, and facts required no apology. Abba was standing 3 feet away, arranging sprigs of rosemary on a tray of lamb skewers. She heard every word. She kept her hands moving. That was Abba. That had always been Abba. She had come to Montreal from Accra 8 years before, following a scholarship that fell through halfway and a dream that refused to die completely. She'd worked in hotel kitchens, hospital cafeterias, catering companies that treated their staff like furniture, replaceable, invisible, rearranged without notice. She had a gift. Anyone who tasted her food knew it. But gifts don't always open doors. Sometimes they just make the people behind those doors more suspicious of you. She ended up at Maison Vaillant catering through a referral from a church friend. The company was boutique, high-end, the kind that served politicians and old money families in Westmount. Abba had been there 14 months. In those 14 months, she had never once been late. She had covered shifts for colleagues who had family emergencies. She had quietly fixed 2 dishes that weren't hers when the lead cook went home sick. Her supervisor, a kind Haitian man named Théodore, had written in her performance file. Exceptional instinct, remarkable under pressure. But Théodore wasn't at the Vaillant estate that Saturday morning, and Marguerite de Champvaillant was. Marguerite was 63, widowed, and in possession of the particular kind of confidence that comes from never having been told no by anyone who mattered. She had inherited her late husband's real estate portfolio, his social circle, and his conviction that the world was divided into people who were served and people who served them. She wore this belief like a second skin, so close she probably couldn't feel it anymore. Her son, Etienne, was engaged to a lovely young woman named Pascal. The engagement party was to be held in the estate's formal garden. 200 guests, 5-course dinner. Everything had been planned for months. Abba was part of the crew assigned to the kitchen. She doesn't belong in this kitchen. Get her out of my sight. The head of the catering crew that day was a woman named Sandra, who had worked with Marguerite's family before. Sandra went pale. She pulled Abba aside near the walk-in refrigerator and spoke to her in a low, tight voice. "I'm sorry," Sandra said, and she meant it. Abba could tell. "She's the client. I don't have a choice." "What reason did she give?" Abba asked. Her voice was steady. Her hands were not shaking. She was proud of that. Later, Sandra couldn't look at her. "She said she doesn't feel comfortable." "Doesn't feel comfortable." Abba untied her apron. She folded it carefully, creased it along the seam, the way her mother had taught her to fold anything worth folding. She set it on the counter. She picked up her bag. She said goodbye to the 2 junior staff members who had watched the whole thing happen and now stared at the floor, not knowing what to do with their faces. She walked out through the service entrance. She did not cry. Not yet. She sat in her car in the estate's side lot for 20 minutes, watching the maple trees move in the wind. Then she called her mother in Accra. "Mama! Abba! Why are you calling in the middle of the day? Are you well?" "I'm well," Abba said. "I just needed to hear your voice." Her mother, who knew her daughter the way only mothers know their children, through the pauses, through the things not said, was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Whatever happened, you carry yourself home with your head up. You understand me?" "Yes, Mama. Your dignity is yours. Nobody can take that from a shelf and walk away with it." Abba drove home. She changed out of her uniform. She sat at her small kitchen table in her Côte d'Ivoire apartment, and she made herself eat something, because her mother had also taught her that you cannot think straight on an empty stomach. Then she cried, briefly and fully, the way you should cry, all the way through, not stopping in the middle. Then she washed her face, and she began to think about what came next. She didn't know, of course, what was already beginning to happen at the Vaillant estate. The catering crew managed the first 2 courses without her. Theodore, reached by phone, had given instructions. But Abba had been the one responsible for the cold larder, the chilled appetizer components, the composed salads, the garnish preparations that required a particular hand. Things began to fall slightly apart in the small ways that guests don't immediately notice but caterers feel acutely, like a thread pulled from a sweater. Then, midway through the 3rd course, the fish, Etienne Vaillant's fiancée, Pascal, began to feel unwell. Pascal had a severe tree nut allergy. She wore a medical bracelet. Everyone in her immediate family knew. Her fiancé knew. The catering company had been briefed, in writing, twice. But the sous chef who had taken over Abba's station had made a substitution. A garnish oil, under pressure, using what was available, and hadn't read the allergy flag on the preparation sheet because the preparation sheet had been in Abba's station notebook, which Abba had taken with her when she left. Not out of spite, because it was hers, because she hadn't known anyone would need it. No one had thought to ask her for it. Within minutes, Pascal's throat began to close. What happened in that dining room was the kind of chaos that imprints itself on everyone who witnesses it. Guests, pushing back chairs, someone calling 911. Marguerite Vaillant standing at the head of the table with an expression no one had ever seen on her face before. Pure, unguarded terror. Not the social terror of a ruined party. The other kind. The kind that comes when you understand that something truly cannot be undone by money or connections or the right phone call. The EpiPen was found. A guest who was a retired physician administered it correctly. Pascal was breathing when the ambulance arrived, but only barely, and it was the kind of only barely that makes everything else irrelevant. Margaret rode in the ambulance. She held her son's hand in the emergency waiting room. She had never in her life sat in a waiting room like that. Fluorescent lights, plastic chairs, the sound of a vending machine humming, and she found it unbearable, not because of the discomfort, but because there was absolutely nothing she could do. No one to call, no favor to pull, just waiting. The ER physician who came out to speak with them was competent and measured and gave them information in clear, careful language. Pascal was stable. She would need to be observed overnight. The reaction had been caught in time. In time, Etienne repeated, like he needed to say it out loud to believe it. Yes, the doctor said. A few more minutes, and it would have been a different conversation. Sandra called Abba that night. It was past 10. I need to tell you what happened, she said. You deserve to know. Abba listened. She didn't speak for a long time after Sandra finished. Is she going to be all right? Abba asked. Pascal, they think so. Yes. Another silence. The preparation notebook, Sandra said. The allergy flags were in your notebook. I know, Abba said. I didn't think. She stopped. I didn't think anyone would need it. I thought they'd check the main briefing file. They should have. That's not on you, Abba. I want you to know that. Abba was quiet again. She was thinking about Pascal, whom she had never met, who had spent her engagement party fighting to breathe. She was thinking about a young woman in a hospital bed, her fiancé next to her. A celebration turned into a crisis. She was thinking about the allergy flag she had written herself, in her careful block letters, the color-coded system she had developed because she believed in getting the details right. She was also thinking about Marguerite Vaillant, who had sent her away, and then she was thinking about something her grandmother used to say. Back in Accra, whenever Abba would come home from school having been slighted by a teacher or excluded by other children, your kindness is not for them, child. It is for you. It is the thing that keeps you whole. She had carried those words her whole life. They had not always been easy to carry. They were especially heavy that night. The call came the next morning. Not from Sandra. From Marguerite Vaillant herself. Abba almost didn't answer. She looked at the unfamiliar number, let it ring twice, and then something. She would not be able to explain what, exactly, not then and not later, made her pick up. Monsieur's Boateng. The voice was different. Something had gone out of it. This is Marguerite Vaillant. I'm calling from the hospital. I heard what happened, Abba said. I'm glad Pascal is going to be all right. A pause. Then, I owe you an explanation. You don't owe me anything, Abba said. And she meant it, not in the way people say things to end a conversation, but genuinely. She did not want an explanation. Explanations never actually explain the things you need explained. Then I owe you an apology, Marguerite said. Okay, Abba said. Another pause, longer this time. Marguerite Vaillant was not a woman who apologized. The words came out stiff, like joints that hadn't been used in a long time. What I did yesterday was wrong, she said. I treated you shamefully, and I had no grounds, and She stopped. Abba could hear her breathing. My son was here this morning, very early, and he said something to me. He said, Maman, you need to make this right. He's a better person than I am, my Etienne. He always has been. Abba didn't say anything. I would like to ask, Marguerite continued, whether you would be willing to come in. To the hospital. Not for work. I'm not asking you to work. Pascal has had reactions before, and she's frightened, and she keeps asking about the preparation process and why the garnish wasn't flagged, and I thought you might be the right person to explain it to her, to help her understand what went wrong so she can feel safe again. Abba stood at her apartment window for a long moment, looking down at the street below. A delivery cyclist went past. A woman walked a small dog, ordinary Saturday morning in the city, the world going along in its way. She thought about saying no. She really thought about it. Because saying no would have been a reasonable thing to do, a human thing to do. No one would have blamed her. Some people would have celebrated her for it. But then she thought about Pascal in that hospital bed, not Marguerite. Not what Marguerite deserved or didn't deserve, just a young woman who was scared and who deserved to understand what had happened to her body and who deserved to feel safe again. The kindness is not for them, child. It is for you. I'll come, Abba said. She took the metro to the hospital. She dressed simply, jeans, a good blouse, her grandmother's gold earrings, because her grandmother would have wanted her to walk into that room looking like herself. Marguerite was in the corridor outside Pascal's room when Abba arrived. She was sitting in a chair, not standing, and it was the first time Abba had seen her at anything other than full height, and something's about it. The smallness of her in the plastic chair, the hospital bracelet on her wrist from when she'd been assessed for her own blood pressure the night before, made Abba feel something she hadn't expected to feel. Not pity, exactly. More like recognition. The kind you have when you see that someone is, underneath everything, just a person. Frightened. Temporary. Doing badly. Marguerite stood when she saw Abba. She looked like she hadn't slept. Thank you for coming, she said. Let's focus on Pascal, Abba said, not coldly, just practically. Inside the room, Pascal was sitting up, pale but alert. Etienne was beside her, holding her hand in both of his. He looked at Abba with an expression of such naked gratitude that it was almost hard to meet. Abba sat down. She spoke to Pascal the way she spoke to everyone, directly, clearly, without condescension. She explained the allergy preparation system. She explained the flag. She explained the substitution that had happened, and why it had happened, and what should have been done differently. She answered every question Pascal asked. She answered the ones Etienne asked. She even answered, quietly, The one Marguerite asked from the corner of the room. By the end of it, Pascal was visibly calmer. The fear hadn't left her face entirely. It wouldn't, not that quickly. But the particular kind of fear that comes from not understanding had eased. And that was worth something. That was worth a great deal. You know your craft, Pascal said when Abba was preparing to leave. I could tell, even from hearing you explain it. It matters to me, Abba said simply. Getting it right. She said goodbye. She shook Etienne's hand. She nodded to Marguerite, who was still sitting in the corner with that unfamiliar expression on her face. In the corridor, Marguerite followed her out. Miss Boateng, Abba. She paused. I'm going to call the catering company and make this right with your record, and I would like, if you're willing, for Maison Vaillant to hire you directly. Not through the agency, for Etienne's wedding, and for anything after that, for as long as you're willing to work with us. Abba looked at her for a moment. I'll think about it, she said. She meant it. She genuinely didn't know yet. You don't have to accept every door that opens just because someone finally decided to open it. You're allowed to think. That's fair, Marguerite said. And for the first time in any interaction Abba had witnessed with her, she sounded like she actually meant what she said. Abba walked out of the hospital into the October air, the kind of cold Montreal morning that feels like it's shaking you awake. Leaves on the sidewalk, the sky that particular pale gray that comes before rain. She stopped on the front steps and pulled her coat tighter and breathed. Her phone buzzed. A message from her mother. How is my daughter today? Abba smiled. She typed back, standing, Mama. Head up. Her mother sent back 3 words. That's my girl. Abba put her phone in her pocket. She started walking toward the metro. She didn't know yet what she would decide about the Vaillant family, about the wedding, about any of it. Some things take time to know. Some doors you stand in front of for a while, before you decide whether to walk through. But she knew this. She had walked into that hospital room with her name intact and her character intact. She had helped a frightened young woman understand what had happened to her body. She had not let what had been done to her make her into someone she didn't want to be. That was not a small thing. She had learned, over years and across oceans, that the world will test you in precisely the ways that are hardest for you specifically, as if it knows exactly where to press. And the only real answer is to know yourself well enough that when the pressure comes, you don't shatter, you bend, and then you come back. She came back. She always came back. Before you go, I want to ask you something, and I want you to think about it honestly. If you were Abba, standing in that corridor, listening to Marguerite ask for help, would you have gone? Leave your answer in the comments. A for yes, B for no, and tell me why, because this one doesn't have an easy answer, and I think you know that. If this story sat with you the way it sat with me, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you're new here, welcome to Ancient African Folktales. We tell stories that stay with you. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one.